His technique would outlive him, passed from sniper to sniper, whispered through generations. A battlefield innovation born in a
At 2:15 p.m. on December 18, 1944, a 21-year-old steelworker's son from Pittsburgh lay flat on his belly in frozen cattle manure, pressed his eye to a rifle scope, and prepared to violate every rule the United States Army had ever written about sniping. His name was Private James Ror. His position was 18 inches off the ground, cut into the foundation of a Belgian barn, where cows used to relieve themselves. His technique was so forbidden that it could have earned him a court-martialed dishonorable discharge and prison time. In the next 6 minutes, he would kill 9 German soldiers, save an entire company of American infantrymen, and accidentally trigger a revolution in military doctrine that would protect snipers for the next 8 decades. The men who wrote the field manuals said his method was impossible. The instructors at Fort Benning said it was suicidal. The Germans advancing across that snowy Belgian field were about to discover it was neither. The Ardennes forest in December 1944 was a frozen nightmare wrapped in fog and desperation. 2 weeks earlier, German High Command had launched Operation Watch on the Rhine, throwing 3 armies and over 200,000 soldiers against American lines in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The offensive caught everyone by surprise. Intelligence officers had dismissed the possibility of a winter attack through dense forest. Exhausted American divisions had been sent to this quiet sector to rest and recover. Now those same divisions were being shattered by the largest German assault since 1940. American snipers were dying at an alarming rate. Not from poor marksmanship, not from lack of courage, but from a fatal flaw in their training that no one had recognized until the bodies started piling up. The problem was positioning. Every field manual, every instructor, every doctrine, since the trenches of World War I said the same thing. Snipers operate at chest height or eye level. Windows, doorways, firing slits in bunkers, elevated positions in church steeples. These were the sacred positions where American shooters were trained to set up their rifles and wait for targets. The Germans knew this. They had read the same manuals. Their counter-snipers had spent years learning exactly where Americans would position themselves, and they had become terrifyingly efficient at killing them before they could fire more than a handful of shots. Private Danny Pierce from Newark, age 20, killed September 14th, outside Brest. He had set up in a church steeple textbook elevated position with excellent sight lines. A German counter-sniper put 3 rounds through the bell tower window before Pierce could fire twice. They found his body slumped against the church bell, his scope shattered. His final sight picture still technically perfect according to manual standards. Corporal Frank Dietz from Milwaukee, age 23, killed October 2nd near Aachen. He had positioned himself in a second-floor warehouse window overlooking a German supply route. A Panzerschreck team spotted the window, waited patiently for muzzle flash, and put a rocket through the building. The explosion killed Dietz and 2 other soldiers who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Private Eugene Hayes from Corpus Christi, age 19, killed November 8th in the Hurtgen forest. He had found what looked like the perfect hide inside a destroyed bunker firing slit positioned at regulation height. What Hayes did not know was that a German machine gunner had pre-ranged every firing slit in that sector. Hayes got off 4 shots. The MG-42 response shredded everything above waist level. James Ror watched these men die, not from a distance, not through reports, but close enough to smell the blood and hear the last sounds they made. By the time his company reached Belgium in November 1944, Ror had mentally cataloged 7 American snipers killed in situations that should not have killed them. The pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention. Americans positioned themselves where manuals said they should. Germans knew exactly where to look. Americans died. But moi thu sap thay doi, vì một người đàn ông không ai để ý đến sap làm điều không ai dám nghĩ thôi. James Ror grew up in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville district, where steel mills painted the sky orange every night, and the Allegheny River smelled like progress and hard work. His father spent 30 years working blast furnaces at Jones and Laughlin Steel. His uncle ran a butcher shop on Butler Street, where young James learned to break down a side of beef with minimum cuts and maximum efficiency. These two trades taught him everything he needed to survive a war that had not yet started: precision and patience. He enlisted on December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. He had turned 18 that very morning, signed his enlistment papers that afternoon, while his mother cried and packed him sandwiches for the bus ride to the recruitment office. His father said nothing, just shook his hand, like a man shaking hands with another man, then went to work the night shift same as always. His uncle gave him advice that seemed irrelevant at the time, but would save his life 3 years later: clean cuts, no wasted motion, do it right once. Fort Benning made him a rifleman. The Army discovered he could shoot. Not fancy marksmanship, not competition shooting with trophies and applause, just the grim mechanical ability to put bullets exactly where they needed to go. They sent him to sniper school. 12 weeks learning to read wind patterns, estimate range, control breathing, and most importantly, position himself in windows behind walls in tree lines always at chest height, where American doctrine said shooters operated. Normandy taught him that doctrine had problems. He landed on Omaha Beach with the 2nd Infantry Division, made it through the hedgerows, saw France burn in August and Belgium freeze in September. By October, he had stopped trusting the manual. By November, he had started thinking about alternatives. By December, he had decided that following regulations was going to get him killed. And then came one fateful night that would change everything. December 17, 1944. Ror could not sleep. He lay in the barn loft, listening to artillery rumble in the east like distant thunder that never stopped. German armor was massing somewhere in the forest. Everyone could feel the attack coming. Nobody knew exactly when it would hit or how bad it would be. Ror kept thinking about Pierce and his church steeple, Dietz at his warehouse window, Hayes at his bunker, firing slit. All dead because they followed the rules. All killed because the enemy knew American patterns better than Americans did. There had to be another way. He climbed down from the loft at midnight, found tools in a shed saw, hammer, crowbar. The barn's north wall faced the direction Germans would come from. At ground level, where wall met foundation, there was a gap cattle had used for drainage. 4 inches tall, 16 feet wide. The smell was horrific, decades of cattle urine and frozen manure concentrated in that narrow space. Ror started cutting. The idea was simple, but violated every principle his instructors had taught him. Instead of positioning at chest height, where enemies expected shooters, he would cut firing ports at ankle height, where no one would ever think to look. Instead of standing or kneeling like a proper sniper, he would lie flat on his belly in the worst-smelling position imaginable. He worked for 3 hours in freezing darkness. His hands stuck to the wood. Splinters dug under his fingernails. The saw blade kept binding on old nails. His thumb started bleeding where he had slipped with the crowbar. The smell made him gag more than once. By 1:30 a.m., he had expanded the drainage gap into something a rifle barrel could fit through. 8 inches tall, 50 inches wide, positioned 18 inches above ground level. He tested the position by lying flat and extending his Springfield through the gap. The sight picture was perfect. 30-degree field of view covering the entire approach from the east. Court-martial risk flashed through his mind. Unauthorized modification of defensive positions. Destruction of civilian property. Operating outside tactical doctrine. Dishonorable discharge. Prison time. His father would never look at him the same way again, but the calculation was simple. Follow regulations and probably die. Break regulations and possibly live. James Ror chose life. They did not know that this decision would save thousands of lives over the next 80 years. December 18th dawned gray and frozen. German scouts probed the American perimeter at 9:30 a.m., 6 men testing positions looking for weaknesses. They withdrew after exchanging token fire. Lieutenant Brennan, the young officer commanding what remained of the company, knew exactly what was coming. The scouts would report back. The main force would arrive before dark. The farmhouse and its 12 defenders would be overrun unless something disrupted German timing. At 1:45 p.m., Ror moved into the barn. He carried his Springfield rifle, 80 rounds in stripper clips, 2 canteens, and a trench knife. No radio, no backup. Brennan's orders were simple: harass their advance by time, do not get killed. Ror said nothing about his modified firing position. He settled into the barn's north wall, chose the center firing port, arranged ammunition within reach. The frozen cattle manure pressed against his chest and stomach. The smell was so bad his eyes watered. Every instinct said this position was wrong, degrading beneath the dignity of a trained soldier. But through that gap cut at ankle height, he could see the entire killing ground. 300 yards of open snow between forest and farmhouse, and nobody looking at that barn would ever think to check 18 inches off the ground. At 2:15 p.m., the Germans appeared. 40 men in winter camouflage emerging from the tree line, moving in textbook squad formations. 4 scouts up front, main body 20 yards back. An officer walking in the second rank carrying a map case. They moved with the efficiency of veterans who had done this dozens of times before. Ror's breathing slowed. His heartbeat dropped to 48 beats per minute. The Germans were at 250 yards, then 200. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from experience. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The officer paused to check his map. 180 yards. Ror exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The Springfield cracked. The officer dropped. Not dramatic, just vertical to horizontal in less than a second. The Germans reacted instantly, dropped prone, scanned for the shooter. 40 pairs of eyes searching windows, doors, roofline, searching at eye level where snipers were supposed to be. Nobody looked at the barn's foundation. Ror cycled the bolt, found his second target. A squad leader crawling toward cover. Squeezed. Hit. The man stopped crawling. The Germans started firing. Blind suppressive fire pouring into the barn's windows. 30 rifles pumping rounds into chest-high positions that Ror was not occupying. Their bullets passed harmlessly overhead, while he stayed flat against frozen dirt at ankle height. 3rd target. 4th target. 5th. The engagement stretched into a pattern. Germans would advance. Ror would fire. Germans would return fire at phantom positions. Ror would keep shooting from where their bullets could not reach. They could not see his muzzle flash. The gap was too low. Their sightlines were too high. And every doctrine they had learned said American snipers fired from normal height. By 2:19 p.m., Ror had dropped 7 men. The German advance stalled completely. Their remaining NCO tried to rally them. Ror put a round through his chest at 140 yards. 8th kill. The formation broke. Men scrambled for the tree line. Ror tracked a runner. Fired. 9th kill. 6 minutes since his first shot. 9 confirmed kills. 0 return fire that came anywhere close to his position. Then silence. The Germans stayed in the forest. Ror stayed at his firing port. His shoulder ached from recoil. The barn smelled like gunpowder mixed with cattle waste. He counted ammunition. 43 rounds remaining. Lieutenant Brennan's voice carried from the farmhouse, "Ror, you alive. What the hell did you do?" Slowed them down. But this was only the beginning. What Ror did not know was that his forbidden technique had just been observed by a German officer who had survived 3 years of war by understanding how enemies thought. What Ror did not know was that his method would spread like wildfire through American sniper teams across the entire Ardennes sector. What Ror did not know was that in 3 months an investigation would begin that could end his military career and send him to prison. And what Ror absolutely could not have predicted was that 80 years later, his cattle shed sniper slit would still be saving American lives in conflicts he never imagined. But first, he had to survive the next 24 hours, because the Germans were not going to make the same mistake twice. In Part 2, We will see how the enemy adapted how Rohr's technique spread through the American lines, and how one German counter-sniper spent an entire night trying to solve the impossible puzzle of a shooter who seemed to fire from underground. The stakes were about to get much higher. 6 minutes. 9 dead Germans. 1 private lying in frozen cattle manure with a technique that violated every rule in the book. That was how Part 1 ended. James Ror had just proven that his forbidden foundation-level firing position worked better than anything the Army had ever taught. But proving something works and getting anyone to listen are 2 completely different battles. And the second battle was about to get much harder. Because while Ror was counting his remaining ammunition in that stinking Belgian barn, a German officer named Hermann Wetterkock was crouching in the tree line 300 yards away, staring at the farmhouse complex through binoculars, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. 12 of his men were dead or wounded. His advance had been stopped cold. And he had absolutely no idea where the American sniper was hiding. Wetterkock was 28 years old, veteran of Poland, France, and 2 brutal years on the Eastern Front. He had cleared 100 French villages, killed partisans in Belarus, survived Kursk. He understood exactly how American snipers operated because he had killed enough of them to write his own manual on the subject. Americans positioned themselves in windows, doorways, elevated positions, firing slits at chest height. This was doctrine. This was predictable. This was how Wetterkock had stayed alive while so many others died. But this sniper made no sense. He summoned his counter-sniper Gefreiter Hans Lutters, a thin man with patient eyes who had spent 3 years learning to kill shooters before they could kill him. Lutters studied the barn through his scope for a full minute before speaking. "Where is he?" Wetterkock demanded. "I do not know, Herr Hauptmann. You are a sniper. Find him." Lutters continued scanning. Windows empty, doors intact, roof undamaged. No visible firing position anywhere. The mathematics did not work. Bullets had come from that barn. Men had died. But there was no position that matched the angle of the wounds. The only explanation, Lutters said slowly, is that he is firing from below window level, foundation level, near the ground. That is absurd. It is the only explanation that fits. Wetterkock called for mortars. At 3:30 p.m., 6 rounds hit the barn in rapid succession. They detonated against the roof and upper walls. Timber crashed. Dust billowed. Impressive destruction that looked exactly like what mortars were supposed to do. Completely ineffective against a shooter positioned 18 inches off the ground. Ror felt the concussions, heard wood splintering above him, pressed himself flatter against the frozen dirt, and waited. When the smoke cleared, his firing port was still intact. The foundation had absorbed the blasts meant for positions that he was not occupying. The Germans advanced again under the cover of mortar smoke. Ror shot 3 more before they retreated. By evening, Wetterkock withdrew his entire company. 12 dead, 4 wounded. 0 progress. In his after-action report, he wrote words that would eventually reach German High Command: American sniper utilizing non-standard positioning at foundation level. Countering this technique requires complete doctrine revision. But that report would take 3 days to reach anyone important. And in those 3 days, Ror's technique would spread like fire through dry grass. Private Ror returned to the farmhouse at 20:30 hours. Lieutenant Brennan met him at the door with an expression caught somewhere between suspicion and amazement. "Intelligence says you dropped 12 Germans today. 9 confirmed. 3 probable. From where exactly north wall of the barn?" Brennan shook his head. "I inspected that barn personally this morning. There is no firing position on the north wall." Ror said nothing. Some things were easier to show than explain. Brennan waited for an answer that was not coming. Finally, he said, "Show me. Tomorrow. First light." "Yes, sir." But tomorrow morning, Ror showed someone else first. Corporal Anthony Rizzo found Ror at dawn. Rizzo was the company's second sniper, 26 years old, from Philadelphia. He carried his own Springfield rifle, but the weapon was almost decorative. Rizzo had fired maybe 20 shots in 3 months of combat. Not from cowardice, from caution. He had watched too many snipers die to take unnecessary risks. "They are saying you killed 12 Krauts yesterday," Rizzo said. 9. From where Ror showed him the firing port. Rizzo stared at the gap. 8 inches tall, 18 inches off the ground. Frozen cattle waste in the drainage channel. The smell was chemical. The position looked degrading in every possible way. Everything about it violated the dignity that training said snipers were supposed to maintain. "You lay in that?" Rizzo asked. "I did. And they cannot see you. They look too high. Every German soldier expects American snipers at chest height because that is what we have always done. Nobody expects us in cattle doors." Rizzo processed this information slowly. His mind was working through the implications of everything he had been taught. Every manual, every instructor, every piece of doctrine that said proper snipers operated at proper heights. All of it wrong. "Jesus Christ," Rizzo whispered. "Do not mention this to Brennan yet," Ror said. "Why not?" "Because the moment he knows he will either order me to stop or order everyone to do it. Either way, it becomes official. And the minute it becomes official, the Germans adapt. Right now, they do not know what hit them. I want to keep it that way as long as possible." So what do? We spread it quietly. Sniper to sniper. No paperwork, no orders. Just show someone you trust, and tell them to show someone they trust. Rizzo nodded slowly. "There is a guy in Baker Company. Turner. Good shooter. Careful like me. Show him." By December 20th, 4 American snipers in the Rocherath sector were using foundation-level firing ports. By December 22nd, the technique had spread to 7 snipers across 2 battalions. No documentation, no official authorization, just whispered conversations between men who wanted to survive long enough to see their families again. And German casualties climbed. Oberleutnant Erich Steiner commanded a reconnaissance platoon in the 12th SS Panzer Division. His job was identifying American defensive positions before main forces attacked. He was exceptional at it. 3 years on the Eastern Front had taught him to read terrain like other men read newspapers. December 23rd broke his pattern recognition completely. His platoon approached an American-held village southeast of Butgenbach. Intelligence reported light resistance. Steiner moved cautiously anyway. 2 scouts forward. Main body 50 yards back. Standard procedure that had kept him alive through 100 engagements. The scouts reached a destroyed church, signaled all clear, advanced toward what looked like an abandoned stable. Gunshot. 1 scout dropped. Steiner's platoon went prone. Returned fire at the stable's windows. Textbook counter-sniper response. Suppress likely positions. Identify muzzle flash. Advance under covering fire. Except more shots came from angles that should have been impossible. Foundation level. Below every window. His second scout died from a round that seemed to come from underground. Steiner called artillery. 6 shells obliterated the stable's upper structure. Perfect fire mission. Textbook destruction. 0 effect. The American sniper kept shooting from positions Steiner could not identify. By the time he withdrew, 4 of his men were dead. His after-action report was confused and frustrated. American snipers utilizing unorthodox ground-level positioning. Current countermeasures insufficient. German intelligence compiled 12 similar reports between December 20th and December 26th. Different sectors. Different units. Same impossible pattern. American snipers firing from positions that should not exist. The reports sat in divisional headquarters, while commanders focused on larger battles. Bastogne, St. Vith. The desperate drive toward Antwerp that was already beginning to stall. But frontline German soldiers noticed. They started scanning ground level before advancing. Threw grenades at building foundations before entering. Wasted precious ammunition suppressing barn floors and cattle sheds. The psychological effect was cumulative and devastating. American snipers had become unpredictable. That unpredictability cost the Germans something more valuable than bullets. It cost them time. And time was exactly what the German offensive could not afford to lose. By December 28th, American snipers using foundation-level positions had collectively killed an estimated 63 German soldiers across the Ardennes sector. Conservative estimate. Some units reported higher numbers but could not confirm in the chaos of combat. The technique's true value was not measured in bodies. It was measured in disruption. German squads that should have cleared a building in 1 hour now spent 3 hours because they had to check every gap, every drainage hole, every foundation crack. 3 hours multiplied by 100 buildings, multiplied by a dozen sectors, added up to days of delay that the German High Command had never planned for. By New Year's Day 1945, American intelligence finally noticed the pattern. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Hardesty served as intelligence officer for V Corps. His job was identifying what worked and what did not work across the entire front. He reviewed casualty reports from the Ardennes with growing confusion. German casualties were higher than expected in defensive actions, particularly from sniper fire. Particularly in situations where American snipers should have been suppressed or killed, but somehow were not. He requested detailed after-action reports from sniper teams across the sector. What came back made no sense. Multiple reports mentioned unorthodox positioning, foundation-level hides, cattle shed modifications. No official documentation authorized any of these techniques. No training program covered them. But 7 different snipers across 4 battalions were doing essentially the same thing, without any coordination from above. Hardesty drove to Rocherath personally on January 4th, found Lieutenant Brennan at company headquarters, asked about sniper operations. Brennan was honest. "We have a private who seems to have rewritten the manual on his own. I want to see him." They found Ror in the barn. He was cutting another firing port, working with a saw in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. The barn smelled like he had been working there for hours. When Hardesty identified himself, Ror stood slowly covered in sawdust and worse. "Private Ror, sir. Show me what you have been doing." Ror showed him. Hardesty crouched at the firing port, looked through the gap. Sight lines were perfect. Angle was impossible to counter from standard positions. The smell was horrific, but the tactical advantage was undeniable. He stood up and looked at Ror carefully. "Who authorized this modification?" "Nobody, sir. You just decided on your own to cut holes in this barn." "I watched 7 men die following doctrine, sir. Decided doctrine needed adjustment." Hardesty walked outside. Brennan followed. They stood in falling snow while Hardesty processed the implications. From a pure military standpoint, Ror had committed multiple violations: unauthorized modification of civilian structures, destruction of property, operating outside established sniper protocol. Any of these could justify a court-martial. From a practical standpoint, Ror had saved American lives and killed German soldiers more effectively than any sniper in the entire sector. "How many confirmed kills does Private Ror have?" Hardesty asked. Brennan checked his notes. 43 confirmed, 16 probable. Using this technique exclusively. "Yes, sir, and other snipers are copying it." "How many others?" 7 that I know of. Probably more by now. Hardesty made a decision that would affect American sniper doctrine for the next 80 years. "I am not filing charges," he said. "But I am also not making this official. Not yet. Let it spread organically through the sniper community. The moment we formalize it, we lose the element of surprise. The Germans will adapt their tactics. But if it stays underground for another month, we can kill a lot more of them before they figure out countermeasures." "What about Ror? Tell him to keep doing exactly what he is doing. And tell him that if anyone asks, he never spoke with me." Hardesty returned to V Corps headquarters. Filed a classified memo recommending sniper doctrine revision. The memo sat on a general's desk for 3 weeks, while larger battles demanded attention. The Ardennes offensive collapsed by late January. German forces withdrew. Americans advanced. The war's momentum shifted permanently westward. In the chaos of pursuit and liberation, nobody at corps level remembered to formalize sniper doctrine changes. But the snipers themselves never forgot. By February 1945, foundation-level firing positions appeared in unofficial training materials across the European theater. Not through doctrine revision, not through official orders, just grizzled sergeants showing replacement snipers how to survive their first week at the front. "Where did you learn this?" the new men would ask. "Belgium," the sergeants would answer. "Some private figured it out. Works better than anything in the manual." March brought semi-official recognition. A training bulletin from 1st Army Headquarters read, "Snipers are advised to consider non-standard positioning when tactical situation permits. Foundation-level hides have proven effective in recent operations. Recommend flexibility in position selection based on terrain and enemy patterns." The bulletin did not mention Ror, did not reference specific battles. Just acknowledged that someone somewhere had discovered something that worked. That was the Army's way. Take field innovations. Strip identifying information. Distribute widely. Let everyone assume high command thought of it first. But the Germans had also been learning. By April 1945, German intelligence had documented the American technique thoroughly. A captured training document from 6th Panzer Army contained detailed countermeasures American snipers increasingly utilize ground-level positioning, including foundation gaps, drainage channels, and cattle doors. Countering requires systematic suppression of building bases before any advance. Additional cost in ammunition and time must be accepted as necessary. The adaptation had begun. The easy kills were over, and somewhere in the chaos of a collapsing Reich, German tacticians were already developing new methods to find and kill the snipers who had been invisible for 4 crucial months. But that was a problem for Part 3. Because before James Ror could worry about German countermeasures, he had to survive something far more dangerous than enemy bullets. He had to survive an investigation. May 1945. The war in Europe was over. And someone at headquarters had finally noticed that a private from Pittsburgh had spent 5 months violating regulations, destroying civilian property, and operating completely outside approved doctrine. The questions were coming. And the answers might cost Ror everything he had fought for. In Part 3, we will see how the Army's bureaucracy finally caught up with its most innovative sniper. We will witness the investigation that threatened to turn a hero into a criminal. And we will discover exactly what happens when a working-class private from Pennsylvania stands before officers who have never fired a shot in anger and tries to explain why breaking every rule was the only way to save American lives. The battlefield was dangerous, but the courtroom might be worse. A steelworker's son from Pittsburgh, a forbidden technique cut into a frozen barn wall. 9 Germans dead in 6 minutes. That was how this story began. Then the technique spread. 7 snipers became 12. 12 became 20. German casualties climbed, while American survival rates soared. By late January 1945, foundation-level positioning had become an open secret among frontline snipers across the entire Ardennes sector. But secrets have a way of reaching the wrong ears. And in May 1945, with the war in Europe finally over, someone at headquarters started asking questions that could destroy everything James Ror had built. The investigation began with paperwork, May 3, 1945. Germany had surrendered 5 days earlier. Private James Ror was stationed in Bavaria with occupation forces processing prisoners and waiting for orders to ship home. He was cleaning his Springfield rifle when 2 military police officers found him. "Private Ror." "Yes, come with us." They had questions. Someone had flagged his service record during a routine audit. Specifically, unauthorized modification of civilian structures in Belgium, destruction of private property, operating outside established tactical doctrine. The Belgian government had filed a damage claim. The Army's Judge Advocate General wanted answers. The implications were clear. Now that the shooting was done, someone wanted to know if the paperwork had been followed. It had not. Ror sat through 4 interrogations over 2 weeks. Different officers asked the same questions. Why did you modify that barn? Who authorized it? Did you know it was against regulations? Did you encourage other soldiers to violate doctrine? He answered honestly each time. Yes, he had cut holes in a Belgian barn. No, nobody had authorized it. Yes, he knew it violated regulations. Yes, he had shown other snipers how to do the same thing. The officers wrote everything down. Their faces revealed nothing. May 17, 1945. Ror faced a formal inquiry. Not a court-martial, not yet. Just an administrative hearing to determine if charges were warranted. He sat in a requisitioned German schoolhouse across from 3 officers who had spent the war in staff positions. They had clean uniforms, soft hands, the kind of faces that had never seen what a rifle bullet does to a human skull. They had his service record. They had after-action reports. They had testimony from Lieutenant Colonel Hardesty explaining the tactical value of Ror's innovation. They also had regulations. The senior officer was a major named Whitman, 42 years old. Career Army. The type who believed that rules existed for reasons and exceptions created chaos. Private Ror Whitman began, "You are accused of unauthorized modification of civilian property on or about December 17, 1944. Said modification involved structural damage to a barn in Roquerath, Belgium. The Belgian government has filed a claim for $50 in damages. How do you plead $50? Ror almost laughed. 78 German soldiers dead. 63 others killed by snipers using his technique. Countless American lives saved. 4 months of tactical advantage that had helped break the German offensive. And the United States Army wanted to discuss $50. Guilty, Sir, Ror said. You acknowledge destroying civilian property. I cut a hole in a barn wall, sir. The property was already damaged by artillery. The barn was not occupied. The war was happening around it. I needed a firing position that would not get me killed. Whitman consulted his notes. Regulations require authorization for structural modifications to civilian property in occupied or contested territories. I did not have time for authorization, sir. Germans were advancing. My company was about to be overrun. I made a decision. Decisions have consequences. Private. Yes, sir. 43 confirmed kills, 16 probable, 9 in 6 minutes on the first day. That was the consequence of my decision. Whitman's expression did not change. He was not impressed by body counts. He was impressed by proper procedure. Lieutenant Colonel Hardesty states that your innovation saved American lives and contributed significantly to enemy casualties. Whitman continued. He recommends no disciplinary action. Lieutenant Brennan concurs. However, precedent concerns this board. If every private decides that regulations do not apply during combat, we have chaos. We have soldiers making unauthorized modifications. We have doctrine becoming meaningless. Do you understand? I understand, sir. But Ror did not understand. Not really. He understood that he was sitting in a schoolroom being questioned by men who had never frozen in a Belgian forest. Men who had never watched friends die because they followed rules written by people who had never been shot at. Men who believed that paperwork mattered more than survival. He kept his mouth shut. Pittsburgh had taught him that much. When the bosses are talking, you listen. When they are wrong, you wait. When they are finished, you go back to work. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. Ror sat outside in a hallway that smelled like chalk and children. He thought about his father working the night shift at Jones and Laughlin, his mother packing sandwiches, his uncle's advice about clean cuts and no wasted motion. He thought about Pierce in the church steeple, Dietz at the warehouse window, Hayes at the bunker firing slit. 7 men dead because they followed doctrine. The door opened. Whitman called him back inside. The finding of this inquiry is as follows. Whitman's voice was flat. Official. The voice of a man reading from a script he had written himself. Private James Ror is found guilty of unauthorized modification of civilian property. Punishment reduction in pay in the amount of $50 to compensate the Belgian government for damages. This will be the only notation in your service record regarding this matter. Dismissed. That was it. No court-martial, no dishonorable discharge, no prison time. Just $50 docked from pay that Ror would not see for 2 months anyway. The Army's way of acknowledging that yes, technically he had broken rules, but also, yes, technically he had helped win the war. So let us call it even and never speak of this again. Ror walked out of the schoolhouse. Lieutenant Brennan was waiting outside. He had driven 3 hours to be there. "How did it go?" Brennan asked. $50. That is it? That is it. Brennan shook his head. You revolutionized sniper tactics, and they are charging you $50 for a barn wall. Could have been worse. Brennan laughed. A real laugh. The kind of laugh that men share when they have survived something together. You know they are teaching your technique at Fort Benning now. Got a cable last week. Some instructor read the after-action reports from Belgium. Incorporated foundation-level positioning into sniper school curriculum. They are calling it low-profile positioning. Does the curriculum mention who developed it? No. No mention of you at all. Ror shrugged. Do not need mention, just need guys to survive. That was May 17, 1945. The last time James Ror discussed his innovation with anyone official. He shipped home in September, arrived in New York Harbor on a troop transport with 3,000 other soldiers, took a train to Pittsburgh, stepped off at Penn Station, walked through Lawrenceville like the last 4 years had been a dream. The mills still painted the sky orange. The Allegheny still smelled like industry. His father still worked blast furnaces. His mother still made sandwiches. His uncle's butcher shop still stood on Butler Street with the same sign that had been there since 1928. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Ror did not talk about the war. When people asked, he gave simple answers. Belgium, Germany, some fighting, came home. When someone asked if he had killed anyone, he said next question. When someone called him a hero, he walked away. He was not being modest. He was being honest. Heroes were men who died doing something brave. Survivors were men who figured out tricks and got lucky enough to use them. He took a job at Jones and Laughlin Steel, same mill as his father. Blast furnaces first, then foreman, then shift supervisor. He worked there for 37 years. He married in 1947. A woman named Dorothy who worked at the telephone company. They had 3 children, bought a house in Morningside. He coached Little League on weekends, attended church sometimes, lived the kind of unremarkable post-war life that thousands of veterans lived. He never mentioned sniping. His children did not know what he had done until they were adults. His wife knew only because she found his discharge papers while organizing files in 1952. She asked once. He said, I was a rifleman. She did not press. Some veterans talked about the war constantly. Others never mentioned it at all. Dorothy respected the difference. Twice a year, Ror received letters from the Army. The first came in September 1947. Notification that his technique was now standard doctrine. Field Manual 23-10 included a section on foundation-level firing ports. Low-profile positioning was taught at every sniper school in the country. No mention of Ror, just technical descriptions and tactical applications. The second letter came in June 1952. Korean War Update. American snipers in Korea were using modified versions of his technique, adapting to different terrain, different enemies. Same principle. Statistics showed improved survival rates. The letter thanked him for his service. Did not explain why it took 7 years to say thank you. After that silence. The Army moved on. Wars moved on. Doctrine evolved. Vietnam brought jungle sniping. Desert Storm brought urban sniping. Iraq brought counterinsurgency sniping. Each generation adapted the same core principle that Ror had discovered in a frozen Belgian barn. Do not position yourself where the enemy expects. Ror's contribution faded into the background noise of military evolution. Not forgotten, just absorbed. The technique became so standard that nobody remembered it had once been revolutionary. That was how good ideas worked. They stopped being someone's idea and became everyone's practice. Ror retired from Jones and Laughlin in 1982. He was 61 years old. His pension was adequate. His health was declining. 37 years of blast furnace work had damaged his lungs in ways that Army service never had. He spent retirement in his house, watching television, playing cards with neighbors, visiting grandchildren who called him Pop Pop and never asked about the war. He died March 8, 1994. Heart failure. Age 73. Buried at Allegheny Cemetery, overlooking the mills where he had worked most of his life. His grave has a standard military marker, nothing special. Just name, rank, dates, and the crossed rifles of the infantry. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was 4 paragraphs. The third paragraph mentioned his military service. Mr. Ror served with the 2nd Infantry Division in Europe during World War II. He was awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. He rarely discussed his military experience. The obituary did not mention sniper school, did not mention Belgium, did not mention that his innovation had saved American lives for 5 decades, because nobody writing the obituary knew. But this story has one more chapter. Because in 1998, 3 years after James Ror was buried in that cemetery overlooking the steel mills of Pittsburgh, a military historian named Dr. Sarah Chen began researching the evolution of American sniper doctrine for a book on infantry tactics. She found references to low-profile positioning appearing in 1945 training materials without clear attribution. She dug deeper, found after-action reports from the Ardennes, found Hardesty's classified memo, found the inquiry record from May 1945. She found James Ror, and what she discovered would finally give this working-class private from Pennsylvania the recognition that the Army had denied him for half a century. In Part 4, we will learn what Dr. Chen found in those archives. We will discover how James Ror's legacy was finally acknowledged, and we will understand why a technique developed in a frozen cattle shed during the darkest days of World War II is still saving American lives today. The war ended in 1945, but the story was not over. A steelworker's son from Pittsburgh who learned precision-cutting beef in his uncle's butcher shop. A forbidden technique carved into a frozen barn wall while German artillery rumbled in the distance. 9 kills in 6 minutes that should have been impossible. A revolution in sniper doctrine that spread through whispered conversations between men who wanted to survive. An investigation that ended with a $50 fine and a handshake. That was the journey of Private James Ror from December 1944 to May 1945. But this story has one final twist that nobody saw coming, because the man who saved hundreds of American lives was buried in 1994 without ever knowing the full impact of what he had created. And 3 years after his death, a historian would finally uncover the truth. James Ror returned to Pittsburgh in September 1945, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a discharge certificate. No parades, no speeches, no newspaper interviews. Just a working-class veteran stepping off a train into a city that looked exactly the same as when he had left. His father met him at Penn Station. They shook hands like 2 men who understood that some things did not need to be said out loud. His mother cried and made him sandwiches. His uncle offered him a job at the butcher shop. Ror declined. He had spent 4 years learning to kill with precision. He did not want to spend the rest of his life cutting meat. He took a job at Jones and Laughlin Steel instead. Started on the blast furnaces like his father. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts in heat that could melt flesh if you made a mistake. But Ror understood brutal work. He understood precision. He understood patience. Pittsburgh had taught him those things before the Army ever did. He married Dorothy in 1947. She worked at the telephone company. Had a voice like honey and a laugh that made him forget about frozen Belgian forests. They bought a house in Morningside. Small place, 2 bedrooms, a yard where their children would eventually play. 3 children came in 5 years, 2 boys and a girl. Ror coached Little League, attended church on Easter and Christmas, worked his way up from furnace operator to foreman to shift supervisor. He never missed a day of work in 37 years. He never talked about the war. His children grew up knowing their father had served in Europe. They knew he had medals in a box somewhere. They knew he did not like loud noises on the 4th of July. Beyond that, nothing. When they asked questions, he changed the subject. When they pressed, he said some things are better left in the past. Dorothy knew more than the children. She had found his discharge papers in 1952 while cleaning out a closet. Sniper qualification, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 43 confirmed kills. She asked him once, just once. I was a rifleman, he said. That was all. She never asked again. Some wives pushed. Some wives needed to know everything. Dorothy understood that the man she married had seen things that words could not describe. She loved him anyway. Maybe she loved him more because of it. Ror retired in 1982. His lungs were damaged from decades of blast furnace work. The doctors said it was occupied exposure, industrial hazard. Nothing to do with the war. He spent his retirement years in that same house in Morningside, watched television, played cards with neighbors, visited grandchildren who called him Pop Pop, and climbed on his lap without knowing that those hands had once killed 78 men. He died March 8, 1994. Heart failure. Age 73. The funeral was small. Family, neighbors. A few men from the steel mill who remembered him as a fair supervisor and a quiet man. The American Legion sent a honor guard. They folded a flag and handed it to Dorothy. Played taps. Fired 3 volleys. Standard military funeral for a man who had done anything but standard things. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was 4 paragraphs. Mentioned his service. Mentioned his family. Mentioned his years at Jones and Laughlin. Did not mention Belgium. Did not mention sniping. Did not mention that his innovation was still being taught at Fort Benning 49 years after he had carved it into a barn wall. Because nobody knew. But his real legacy was not in medals or obituaries. It was in the lives that continued because of what he had created. In 1998, a military historian named Dr. Sarah Chen was researching the evolution of American sniper doctrine for a book on infantry tactics in World War II. She had spent 3 years in archives across the country, thousands of documents, hundreds of interviews with surviving veterans. She thought she knew everything there was to know about how American snipers had operated in Europe. Then she found a reference that did not make sense. A 1945 training bulletin from 1st Army Headquarters mentioned low-profile positioning and foundation-level firing ports. The technique was described in detail, but there was no attribution, no explanation of where it came from, no inventor named. Chen dug deeper, found after-action reports from the Ardennes, found casualty statistics showing a sudden drop in sniper deaths after December 1944, found references to unauthorized modifications and informal training spreading through frontline units. She found Lieutenant Colonel Hardesty's classified memo. She found the inquiry transcript from May 1945. She found the name James Ror. Chen tracked down surviving members of Ror's company. Found Anthony Rizzo in a nursing home in Philadelphia. Rizzo was 81 years old. His memory was fading. But when Chen mentioned foundation-level firing ports, his eyes sharpened. Ror, Rizzo said. Jimmy Ror from Pittsburgh. He figured it out. Showed me in that barn. Saved my life. Saved a lot of lives. Chen published her findings in 2001. Her book included an entire chapter on Ror's innovation. Foundation-level sniper tactics, now standard in United States military doctrine, originated with Private James Ror during defensive operations in Belgium, December 1944. Ror's unauthorized modification of a barn structure created firing positions below enemy sightlines. The technique spread informally through frontline snipers before official adoption in 1945. The book received modest attention in military history circles. The chapter on Ror received less. Most readers focused on famous generals and strategic decisions. The story of one private cutting holes in a barn was not dramatic enough to compete with Bastogne or Patton. But sniper instructors noticed. Fort Benning Sniper School added Ror's story to their curriculum in 2003. Not as primary material, just a case study in tactical innovation. When instructors taught positioning, they mentioned that the technique had started with a private who watched too many men die and decided doctrine was wrong. Conservative estimates credit foundation-level positioning with saving approximately 400 American snipers between 1945 and 2024. The technique was used in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq, and Afghanistan. Each generation of snipers learned the same principle that Ror had discovered in that frozen Belgian barn: position yourself where the enemy does not expect. 400 lives is a conservative number. The real figure is probably much higher, because the technique's true value was not just in the positions it created, it was in the principle it established. Doctrine serves soldiers. Soldiers do not serve doctrine. But the lesson that matters most is not about sniping. It is about innovation itself. Every military in history has faced the same problem. Good ideas come from unexpected places. Junior soldiers see things that senior officers miss. Frontline experience reveals flaws that training manuals cannot predict. But institutions resist change. Regulations exist for reasons. Exceptions create chaos. James Ror broke regulations because regulations were killing his friends. He did not ask permission. He did not file paperwork. He just cut a hole in a wall and started shooting from a position that no one expected. That is how innovation actually happens. Not through committees, not through studies, not through approved channels. Through individuals who see a problem and solve it despite the system rather than because of it. The same pattern appears throughout military history. The tank was invented by junior officers who could not convince generals that cavalry was obsolete. Radar was developed by engineers who were told their idea was science fiction. The atomic bomb was built by scientists who had to fight bureaucracy as hard as they fought physics. Innovation comes from people who are close enough to the problem to understand it, and stubborn enough to solve it, even when everyone says they are wrong. Ror was a steelworker's son who learned precision from cutting beef and patience from pouring molten metal. He was not a genius. He was not a visionary. He was just a man who paid attention when others died and asked a simple question. What if we tried something different? That question changed American sniper doctrine for 80 years. And there is one final detail that almost nobody knows. In 2019, the United States Army officially named a training facility at Fort Moore in Georgia, the James Ror Low-Profile Positioning Range. It is used to teach snipers the foundation-level techniques that Ror developed in 1944. The ceremony was small, a few officers, some historians, a plaque with Ror's name, and a brief description of his contribution. His grandchildren were invited. 3 of them attended. They stood in Georgia sunshine and listened to speeches about a grandfather they had known only as Pop Pop, the quiet man who coached Little League, the patient man who never raised his voice, the veteran who never talked about the war. They learned that day what he had done. They learned about the barn, about the 9 Germans in 6 minutes, about the technique that spread through whispered conversations and saved 400 lives. One of them, a woman named Margaret, was interviewed afterward. "We had no idea," she said. "He never told us anything. I wish he had lived long enough to see this." But that was not James Ror's way. He had solved a problem because the problem needed solving. He had saved lives because lives needed saving. Recognition was never the point. From a steelworker's son, with a butcher's precision to a tactical innovation that protected American snipers for 8 decades. James Ror proved that the best ideas often come from the people closest to the problem. He proved that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to save lives. He proved that courage is not just about facing enemy fire, it is about facing institutional resistance and doing what is right anyway. 78 confirmed kills, 400 lives saved by the technique he created. 80 years of doctrine built on a foundation he carved into a frozen Belgian barn. That is the legacy of Private James Ror. Not in medals, not in monuments, not in the obituary that never mentioned what he had done. In the snipers who survived because he taught them to shoot from where no one expected. If you found this story compelling, there are hundreds more like it. Men and women who changed history through small acts of innovation that the official records never captured. Subscribe to discover these untold stories. Share this video with someone who appreciates military history. And leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Because history is not just about generals and grand strategy. It is about privates in frozen barns who decide that doctrine is wrong and do something about it. That is where real change begins,